Welcome back to another episode of the Monice Hour. I'm your host, Monice, and today we're going to be talking about sexual identity and sexual fluidity. I will be sharing my perspective as a Black queer woman, but I do want this episode to be for anyone in the community because we all know what it's like to feel pressured into a label and all of the rules that come with just being in the community. And so I wanted to speak on it. So whether you are bi, gay, lesbian, pan, trans, queer, non-binary, androgynous, whatever you are, I hope that this episode also just helps you in some type of way. But I also hope that those that are maybe not in the community can take something away from this episode. So I have talked about this a few times in the past about my coming out story, if you will. But I also want to share something about me from when I was younger, like a teenager. I remember when I was a teenager, I was about 16 years old, and I was talking to this girl that I just liked so much. She was a tomboy at that time, and I just had the biggest crush on her. We talked day in, day out on the phone, okay, and fall asleep on the phone. It was all of the things that you do when you have a crush on someone. And so my best friend at the time in high school, she asked me one day and she was like, "Do you like her? Are you gay?" Like just asking me the questions. But when she was asking me, it was making me feel uncomfortable because how she was asking me, it felt very judgmental in the tone. And she was like, "So are you gay now? Do you like girls?" And she was like, I'm gonna tell your mom or whatever. And I'm like, "No, I'm not gay. I'm not gay. What are you talking about? We're just friends." Meanwhile, I know damn well I have like the biggest crush on this girl. Okay. The girl knows I have a crush on the girl. But I'm like, you know what? It's cool. I'm not gay. Okay. I was really trying to convince myself that I wasn't gay. Also, I have to mention that because I grew up in a very heavily Christian household, I felt like liking women was the devil's work. And it was a natural based off of like how I was taught. My mom was like always in the church, kind of like a minister. We were in church day in and day out. So I felt like me liking this girl was wrong anyway, and something was wrong with me. Even being that young and someone asking me if I was gay or do I like girls or like am I a lesbian, whatever it is, I still even couldn't define who I was at that time. And it felt like pressure, but it also felt like judgment. It didn't feel good at all. But that was also my introduction to sexual identity. Question that I do want to ask you guys is, do you think that sexual identity shapes us, or do we shape our own sexual identity? That's a good question. So I know I talked about sexual identity and sexual fluidity, but for those of you that do not know what sexual identity and sexual fluidity are, I am going to tell you what those are. Sexual identity is how we define ourselves. So whether you're gay, lesbian, pan, or queer, that's how you identify as who you are. Sexual fluidity is how attraction and desire can shift over time across experiences and under certain circumstances. And also, I just want to say that sexual identity can change because there's also fluidity in part of that. Okay. So when we talk about sexual identity and we talk about fluidity and just queerness as a whole, gayness as a whole, or just homosexuality in general, I also just want to talk about history because I feel like now in this day and age, people feel like queerness, gayness is a new concept. But in fact, it's been around for many years. Before pre-colonization, it's been around. It's been around. And I wanted to discuss some key points in history where there was queerness or not even just queerness, right? I also just want to talk about how we didn't have these strict roles and rules in regards to how you live your life, who you marry, whether it's platonic, not platonic. We're going to talk about that today. In my teenage years and even well into my early adult years, I used to get frustrated by the idea of having to put myself in a box and pick who I am as far as my sexual identity goes. because, as I mentioned in my previous story at the very beginning of this episode, I honestly have been struggling with my sexual identity since I was 16. Not right now, but before, yes. And it was very frustrating having to always put yourself into a box and define who you are so people can make sense of you. I also would feel confused because many people in the queer community were also very judgmental and telling me that I'm not this, but I'm this. It's like, how are you telling me who I am? Okay. I started digging recently into the history of the queer community, and I have been trying to understand where the stigma around queerness, identity, and sexual fluidity really comes in. When did it start and why? And just trying to understand why things are the way they are now. So, way before colonialism, there were many African societies that held more fluid and flexible understandings of gender and relationship. They didn't always align with today's labels of being gay, straight, or bi, but they did reflect the world where identity wasn't forced into tight boxes. So I'm going to go into two history lessons here, so be prepared. For example, among the Igbo tribe of Nigeria, there were women who took on the roles of female husbands, and they married other women to secure lineage and property rights. Now, these relationships were not sexual. They were about economics, lineage, and social standing. But the reason why I'm bringing it up and the reason why it's still important for me to mention it is because they show that before colonial influence, people's ideas of gender and partnership were far more flexible. Our communities understood that gender roles didn't have to be rigid and that relationships could be built on more than just romance or sex. That flexibility is something that we lost under colonialism, and it's part of why our modern views on sexual identity feel so restricted. Marrying another woman, people often assume that you're a lesbian. It's not the way it was back then where you could have a female husband and it be like that's just how you're doing things, and it isn't romantic, but it was understood. Now, even if you were doing something like that, you would still be judged for it, even if it was strictly platonic. So in Swahili, the Swahili society, right, Mashoga were men who took on feminine roles and sometimes have relationships with other men. Before colonization, they could be visible members of the community and work in certain respected trades. Their existence proves that gender expression and same-sex relationships were not foreign to African culture. It was part of it, right? These practices weren't necessarily labeled the way we think of gay and lesbian today, but they showed that non-heterosexual relationships were not universally condemned, which is important. Of course, after colonization, it was a wrap. And even with the female husbands, when the British colonized Nigeria, they shunned that and thought it was wrong, and people weren't allowed to have female husbands anymore. That just wasn't a thing. I also want to just talk about the disruption, continuing on with history. Furthermore, when we talk about history, sexual identity, queerness, gayness, it's important to understand how Christianity, colonialism, slavery, even slavery, post-slavery has affected the Black queer community. European colonizers brought the rigid gender and sexuality rules, using religion to frame anything outside of heterosexuality as sinful. Okay? If you weren't heterosexual, that was a sin and God didn't like it. Okay. And then when we're talking about slavery, African cultural norms were broken apart, which we know, and Christianity became a survival framework, but also a gatekeeper against queerness. Now, Black churches, like after slavery, became vital for organizing, but often enforced heteronormativity, silencing or excluding queer expression. The history is important because I think that colonization, Christianity, and other religions have erased the fact that queerness, queer people have been around for many years, like from the beginning of time, really, and how it's a part of who we are, But the difference between now and then is that people didn't have to label themselves. You were just who you were, versus now there is just pressure to be something. You have to pick a box. You have to check a box. But the reason why is because when you pick a box and you check a box off and you put yourself into one, that allows people to fully understand you. That's why there are labels, so that people can understand. But sometimes you don't belong in a box and you can't fully fit in one because you have different traits of other things from other boxes, and that's okay. There shouldn't be pressure around that. I also want to say that, like I said, it did come from colonialism, from the church, right? But even in queer spaces, we've also carried that same belief that we all have to pick a box. And that's why you'll hear people having rules about, oh, you're not really lesbian, or you're not really gay, or you're not really this. Please, we should also make room for fluidity. The idea that pressure to a label has roots in colonialism, Christianity, and other survival strategies is supported by both historical research and lived-in experiences by the Black queer community. And I feel like that's where that box came from. Colonialism and the church made sexuality and gender rigid. And for Black people, survival meant following those rules. Okay. Because we already, as Black people, experience racism. But then if you add that layer on there, you're screwed. Like queerness, you're screwed. And so because of this, right, because of what we taught from colonialism, because of Christianity, and like I said, other religions, that has come into queer spaces, but in a different way. And that's why it's so frustrating that we have to pick a label. We have to pick a label. Labels are meant to make sense of you for others, but it also just ends up restricting you in the long run. So as a certified member of the LGBTQ community, I've also experienced my share of having to put myself in a box. I know, like I said before, labels are a way for people to try to understand you, but it was really frustrating when I was trying to understand myself. How can I put myself in a box if I don't even fully understand who I am yet and what I like and my sexual identity? But for me, pressure to put myself in a box or for people to understand me and my identity was people asking me, is it a phase? How do I identify? Or am I just with women because men hurt me? Or or even just asking me recently, will you ever date a man again? And those questions are honestly frustrating because I've answered them like a shit ton of times. But the answer is no, right? To most of the questions, to all of them, except for how you identify, right? Lesbian. I'm going to stop saying lesbian. I call myself queer for a reason. And the reason for that is that I find myself sometimes attracted to people in the community that might not identify as a woman. I'm going to tell you guys a quick story. Like I said, as you know, I've been liking women since I was a small kid, okay, a teenager, whatever. And before that, as an adult, right now, within the past 6 years or so, 7 years, I've decided that I was going to stand on business and really own who I am and like what I like without being afraid and without feeling like I have to be with a gender that I don't even really want to be with because of Christianity and because of religion and because of my mom. I don't care. Stepping into my truest self as a queer woman has been difficult. Why has it been difficult? I've had lesbians tell me that I'm bi and tell me that they wouldn't touch me because, yes, I've dated men in the past. I've had family members talk bad about me, saying that it's a bad influence on my kid, all of the things. Or just people telling me that I'm not really gay or, queer. So it is frustrating. There's so many rules, and I don't even think there should be rules. Personally, I don't even think labels should really exist. I should just be able to tell you what I'm interested in, and you go with it and leave me the hell alone. Okay? I'm going to also talk about this because it actually frustrated me, but I understood. A few weeks ago, I was asked if I would date men again. Now, I got frustrated about this because I already explained myself before, but I felt the need to really take it a step further and really explain. When you grow up with religion, strict parents, that are also brainwashed by religion, you see things differently, and it's not in a good way. Me liking girls at a young age, I felt like it was wrong. I felt like it was demonic, and I felt like there was something wrong with me. As a result of that, throughout my teenage years and early adulthood, I would find myself having crushes on women, like literally flirting with them, everything. But then when it came to admitting that I liked them, I would be like, no, I'm not gay. I felt ashamed, and I dated men only because I thought that that's what God wanted me to do and that was the right thing to do. But every time I just knew that I was attracted to women, I was constantly looking at them, like daydreaming, having butterflies in my stomach. It was really a thing, like a true crushes on them and to no end. And I had to explain this to my brothers when they asked me this over the summer, that when you are hiding from who you are for so long, your brain starts to convince you that you actually like this thing because you're pretending. The brain is a powerful thing. But once you actually step into who you are and you own who you are and you indulge in the things that you actually like, you realize that you never liked the first thing that you thought you liked out of survival and society, right? I just wanted to conform to society norms and what Christianity, my mom, and everybody else around me wanted me to do. But honestly, I always was this person. I'm just now finally letting this person out to be free. So yes, I'm authentically myself now. I'm outly queer. I don't care who's upset. I don't care who it bothers. That's who I am. It took me a lot to get to that point. It took a lot of crying and convincing. And I think now I'm at the age where I'm not convincing you of shit. You either accept me if you don't. And if you don't, get the fuck on. That's it. Including even in friendships. Because even in friendships, I've also had to explain that my friends that knew me years ago, like 10 plus years ago, they are also sometimes, especially when they come back around into my life, they're so confused because they remember who I was, but I was also hiding from myself. So once I explain it to them, they also are like, it actually makes so much sense. Exactly. So I also just want y'all to know that the pressure that I'm talking about, though, of identifying who you are, because that was another thing of people just asking me, what are you? What are you? What are you? And that's why I decided to go with queer, because while I primarily date women, I do. Sometimes I find myself attracted to people, like I said, that don't identify as women. Some people are non-binary or androgynous, that makes me queer. I know I'm very specific because the community has forced me to be specific, unfortunately. So I don't have time. I really don't. But outside of the community, that pressure to identify, like I said, doesn't just come from the outside of the community. Queer people also do the same thing. And I know you guys, if you're a part of the LGBTQ community, especially the lesbian community, then you saw a few weeks ago the stories about the masculine presenting women and them dealing with men and all of the things, and just people going on a whole tangent about that, about how they identify as this, but they're doing this. And that's where we're going to get into that in a little bit, where sexual fluidity comes in. And that's why I personally hate labels, because while someone might be a masculine presenting person that dates women, they also have the right to decide that I also want to date a man, if they want to date a man or anyone else, and they should not be judged for that. Going into it, right? I think a lot of times the reason why there's so much hate when it comes to lesbians they finding out that lesbians are talking to men, or even more masculine presenting lesbians are talking to men, is because of the phobias that exist in the community. We have biphobia, panphobia, and transphobia, or just other biases that come from inside of our community. And it's the idea that certain identities are less real, or that people claiming are just passing through on their way to something else, or that they're confused. That mindset ignores the fact that there is a such thing as sexual fluidity. Sexual fluidity is not a phase, it's not confusion. Sexuality is just fluid. That's just it. That's just it. So the Black queer community specifically, and I only speak about this community because it is the community that I am a part of, but I know it exists throughout the entire LGBTQ community, there's an unspoken rule book for how you're supposed to act, dress, or even live based on how you present yourself. And to me, that is annoyingly exhausting. Like, it's frustrating. We know for Black masculine presenting women who are lesbians, also known as studs, AGs, and they have other names, there's a stereotype that says they're supposed to be tough, hard, or just have this really masculine, manly energy to them, forgetting the fact that they are also women. It also just gives them the same standard as you would a straight Black man in general. Think about what I just said. People subconsciously have that in their mind when they think of studs. So there's an expectation for them to stay in a fixed role, for them to perform masculinity in a way that feels more like a freaking job description than self-expression. If a Black woman desires to dress more masculine, it is assumed that she is a stud. And people don't ask, but they already assume. They already assume. I want to say this. The reason why I brought up studs and them being in a fixed role is that I've noticed that they can be treated as if they are a straight Black man. And they have to perform their masculinity. They have to perform it. Because they're masculine, they're supposed to do manly things. That's what people think. That's not how that works. Masculinity and femininity are both energies, and they're part of self-expression, but they shouldn't be tied to roles, if that makes sense. When we box people in like that, it prevents them to have agency over their own identity, including the women that dress masculine. And people assume that they're a stud even when they're not. Someone might be a stud, or they might be a STEM, or they might not identify as either of those. They might also just identify as them or nothing. They just like to dress in boy clothes, but we automatically assume there are labels for them. That's the problem. And I feel like that's a lot of times what happens on social media. When people see a woman that does dress more mask, automatically assuming that they're a stud, and those people never confirm that. But I also think that people don't even know what the term stud means. They just think it means masculine presenting, a Black masculine presenting lesbian. Lesbian is a key word in that. Okay. Black gay men, I'm sure, also experience the same thing. I know that gay men that are more feminine are also given certain stereotypes, and then those that are masculine and are straight passing might also get labeled as DL because people think they're trying to hide something. Meanwhile, they are just secure in who they are and they're living their best life. But because, once again, they don't look a certain way or fit a certain label, you think they're trying to hide something. Okay, anyway, see what I'm saying? But outside of stereotypes based off of appearance, the stereotypes that we have also bleed into these relationships. So if a stud is dating a feminine woman, it is assumed that they have to take on heteronormative gender roles. And some femmes like that, and it is their expectation. I have literally heard a stud tell me that the girl got mad that she didn't take the trash out because it's her job, because she's masculine. I'm sorry, what? Y'all have to stop. Y'all have to stop doing that. I'm also going to go into this. I don't even want to get into it, but even the whole stud dating another stud conversation, people think it's weird or it's gay. But I'm like, you're already lesbian, so what are you even talking about? It is the same with two masculine presenting gay men or two feminine gay men. It doesn't matter. People have the same thoughts and stereotypes, and unless it mirrors heteronormative gender roles and traditions, they can't understand it. They can't. And that's what I'm realizing. But this is all within the queer community as well. Presentation, how you identify, or who you choose to love is not a contract. That can change. It can all change. You could decide that you want to be masculine one day, feminine one day. You can decide that you want to date women one day and somebody else the next day. It literally doesn't matter. Presentation is also not your identity. Just like your attractions can be fluid, like what you like on a day-to-day basis, what you like to eat, what you want to wear, your sense of style, whatever. That can be fluid. That can change and shift, right? So can your presentation and your sexual identity. When we start making assumptions about someone's sexuality based off of how they look, we are not only putting them into a box, but we're also closing the lid. We're closing the lid too, because yeah, that's who you are. You have to stay that way. Come on now. Some people are also just misinformed and take on these roles without properly looking into them. And so that's what I was talking about a moment ago when I said that there are some people that dress masculine, but people assume that they are stud, but they actually might date men and things like that, or people in the queer community that don't identify as women, right? So they're either just queer or they're just a masculine presenting woman, but they're not a stud because a stud is a lesbian. And a lesbian is a woman who likes women. That is the definition, right? So if we're talking about being strict to a label, that's what it is. But of course, when you don't follow the label, that's when you get the heat. Okay. For Black queer people, all of this, the labeling, the presentation, policing, it gets heavier because of intersectionality. We are already navigating racism in queer spaces, and we also navigate homophobia in the Black community. That double marginalization makes it even harder to explore or express yourself freely, right? So sexual fluidity refers to how your attraction can shift over time in different contexts and doesn't always fit into fixed labels. Sexuality in general is just not black and white. Some people know who they're attracted to and it stays the same over time. But then there's other people that they like somebody a lot, they like certain things, and then it shifts and it adds to their preference. And that's okay. I think we also just need to make room for that, though. For example, someone can identify as lesbian for many years, but over time, they start to be more attracted to other genders or expressions. But it doesn't erase their past identity as a lesbian. It just means that they evolved and that they have expanded. Those labels do force yourself to put yourself in a box and stay in that box, which stops you honestly from being your most true and authentic self because it doesn't let you truly explore your heart's desire. It also makes it harder for you to explore outside of that box without people trying to question your authenticity. Going outside of that box then opens the doors of judgment, causing people to do things in secret, right? So when you are scared to really truly explore who you are, you'll then start to explore that stuff in secret. So you might be in a relationship with someone, but doing stuff with someone else because you are afraid. And that relationship is honestly your cover up. But that is a problem that I have in the queer community as a whole is because we create so many rules that it causes division and it excludes people, and it's not right. People, no matter what community you're part of, should be able to experience and explore themselves freely and fully without being judged. We live in a world that's just obsessed with locking people into categories. The labels were put people in a box so that they can better understand and rationalize how you think. If it goes outside of that, it's a problem. For Black queer folks, this can also feel just a lot heavier because we have to deal with intersectionality, which is navigating racism in queer spaces and homophobia in Black spaces. And when you add sexual fluidity on top of all of that, it can feel like you're opening yourself up to even more judgment. Just because someone is more sexually fluid, that does not make them any less queer or gay than the next person. I'm letting you know today that you should be able to be free in who you are and express yourself freely. Do not let anyone limit you or put you in a box or make you feel low or stay low because that's the problem. I talk about this a lot on threads when people make comments because it's just not right. If you're this way, you're not supposed to do this. If you're that, you're not supposed to be doing that. And I'm just like, why? This is kind of off topic, but I'll just give you an example of this that doesn't relate to sexuality or even, it doesn't relate to sexuality at all. It's honestly off topic. But a girl made a post saying that if you are not Caribbean, you should not be making Caribbean food, right? And a lot of people agreed. And I agree to a certain extent, but I'm going to still make it anyway. I am not Caribbean. I'm African American. But one thing about it, I'm going to still make it anyway. You want to know why I'm going to make it anyway? Because I do believe in making dishes from places throughout the African diaspora. I don't care. I literally do not care. And when I make whatever I make, it comes out fire every time. So leave me alone. That's an example, though, of what it's off topic, but you get the point. After everything that we talked about today, we talked about our history in the queer community, the pressure to label ourselves, and the way we police presentation, how race plays into everything, and the truth about sexual fluidity. All of this comes down to give yourself permission to be your truest self. If you are in the queer community, LGBTQ community, and you feel like you are locked into your label and you feel like you cannot explore yourself, I'm going to ask you to give yourself permission to explore who you are. It is your life. Who you like, who you have sexual encounters with is only your business and your business alone. If people can't understand you and don't want to understand you and want to judge you, then those are people that you should not have in your life at all. You should only have people in your life that accept you fully for who you are. And that is it. I think that we get so caught up in what other people think of us that we forget to be our truest self. And you should be your truest self. If they don't understand your label, if they don't understand how you move, who gives a flying? If you are more masculine presenting and you want to get your nails done and want to wear makeup or whatever you want to do, don't let anyone stop you or anyone tell you shouldn't be doing that because you identify this way. Please. And that's what I'm talking about. The rules are going to drive us all insane as a community. We have to stop doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. It was so nice talking to you guys today about this. I have been wanting to talk about it for a while. By the way, if you look at my cover art for the Monice Hour, you'll see that there is a clock and I'm in the center of it. And we have different hours. We have Black hour, queer hour, mom hour, work hour. That's it. And we have art in the middle. This episode, starting today, is going to be part of Queer Hour. So based off of all of those different hours on the clock, we'll have topics specific to those hours. And if there's something that you're interested in, if you're interested in more mom topics, those will be under Mom Hour. If you're interested in more Black topics, it'll be under Black Hour. If you're interested in more work topics like tech related things, that will be under Work Hour. And then Art Hour is something that I'm going to do once a month, and that will be me creating art and talking to you guys, but that will be a YouTube exclusive only. So it will not be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcasting platforms. That will only be available on YouTube just because it's art. So you'll be watching me make art and talk, and you can also chime in and make some art and listen to me talk as well. So I'm really excited for that. So I'm just giving you guys a heads up. If you listen to this episode, I hope that it brought you some light and confidence to just be who you are. I hope that I was able to shed light on the history of queerness and, well, some history, but there's many more things to learn about the queer community as a whole. So if you guys also want to deep dive and do your homework on that, you absolutely should. I just want everyone to feel comfortable with being who they are and being their most truest self, and don't feel like you have to force yourself into a label. Because honestly, people don't talk about this. Sometimes you are just trying to figure yourself out. And that's why for me, when I can't figure myself out, queerness, because once again, sexuality is fluid. Make sure you guys follow me on social media at the Monice Hour for Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, the Monice Hour. I'll see you guys on the next episode. I hope you guys have a great weekend and week, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.